Forest Mysteries. The late afternoon sun dipped behind the thick canopy, casting elongated shadows across the snow-blanketed riverbank. A sharp, frigid breeze stirred the branches, causing frost-laden limbs to sway with a whispering hush. Thomas stood still, his eyes fixed on the ground just beyond his modest wooden cabin. The snow here was disturbed. Deliberate footprints traced a narrow, winding pattern around the perimeter, their edges crisp and fresh despite the fading light. His breath formed pale clouds as he crouched to examine the tracks more closely. The prints defied familiarity, irregular shapes, purposeful yet unsettling. Some resembled paw prints, but the pattern was strange. Tight spirals, sharp turns, almost as if someone had been studying his home. The prints crossed and recrossed, leading away into the woods and returning again, suggesting an intelligence behind their arrangement. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint rustle of snow slipping from branches and the distant groan of shifting ice on the river. Thomas reached out, brushing aside a thin layer of powder that had settled over the tracks. His gloved fingers pressed into the snow, testing its freshness. Still warm, still moist. Whatever creature or entity had made these footprints had passed here less than an hour ago. He stepped back, narrowing his eyes as he scrutinized the pattern. A flicker of unease tightened his chest. His years patrolling these woods had taught him to read tracks, signs of animals, prey, predators. But this, it was different, calculated, intentional. The pattern suggested purpose, perhaps even curiosity. A sudden gust of wind swept through, causing the trees to sway and the snow to whisper softly. Thomas shivered, not from cold alone, but from a primal instinct warning him of unseen eyes watching. His experience told him to trust his senses. Something was off, lurking just beyond the veil of trees. He could feel it in his bones. His hand instinctively moved to his coat pocket, closing around the small flashlight he always carried. With a cautious flick, he illuminated the snow in a narrow cone. The beam revealed the edges of the footprints, casting stark shadows that accentuated their strange contours. He knelt, carefully tracing one of the spirals, feeling the crunch of snow beneath his knees. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from the woods, an ice sheet shifting or a branch snapping, breaking the heavy silence. Thomas's grip tightened on the flashlight. His eyes darted across the darkness, trying to discern movement. Nothing, only the snow's gentle descent, blanketing everything in a cold hush. He straightened slowly, the weight of suspicion pressing down. The forest around him seemed denser, darker, shadows pooling like ink. He knew these woods well. Every animal trail, every rustle of foliage. But these footprints were unlike anything he'd seen before. They hinted at an intelligence, perhaps even an unnatural presence. His mind raced. Why here? Why now? The tracks could be a warning or a trap. He recalled stories of strange occurrences in these woods, mysterious lights, unexplainable sounds. The metallic scent lingering in the air now made his stomach tighten. It was faint but persistent, like rusted iron or blood. He sniffed again, trying to identify it, but the scent was elusive, yet it prickled his instincts. His hand moved to his coat, fingers closing around a small, worn notebook and a pair of binoculars. Carefully, he sketched the footprints, noting their size, pattern, and the peculiar spiral formations. Then, He looked back into the shadows, considering his next move. The pattern suggested someone or something had been deliberately observing him. He hesitated, weighing his options. Staying here was risky. The tracks indicated a presence that was either curious or hostile. He could follow them into the woods, but that might lead to a confrontation or a false trail. Instead, he decided to set a trap, something to lure or catch the intruder. He retrieved a small flare from his pack, placing it discreetly near the cabin's edge, then retreated to a vantage point overlooking the clearing. As he settled into position, he kept the flare ready. The woods grew darker, shadows merging into a black curtain. The moon, a thin crescent, began to rise, casting a faint glow over the snow. The landscape seemed to breathe. Every crack of a branch, every whisper of wind, amplified in the silence. Suddenly, a faint metallic clang echoed from deeper within the forest, followed by a low, almost musical hum. Thomas's senses sharpened. The sound was unnatural, too rhythmic, too deliberate. He scanned the trees, but nothing moved. Only the snow continued its gentle fall, muffling any further noise. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, a flicker of movement caught his eye, a shadow slipping between the trees, quick and silent. His grip on the flare tightened. The intruder was near. He adjusted his stance, readying himself for whatever might emerge. A gust of wind carried a faint, almost melodic whisper, like distant voices or a haunting tune. Thomas strained to catch the source, but the woods remained still. Only the snow's quiet descent persisted, blanketing the world in icy silence. Every so often, a branch cracked or shifted, reminding him that nature was alive and unpredictable. He shifted his gaze back to the footprints. They were still there, but now they seemed to lead toward the cabin, an invitation or a trap. His mind raced. Who or what had left them? Why circle his home? Was it curiosity or was something more sinister? A sudden movement in the corner of his vision made him freeze. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, cloaked in darkness, eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. Thomas's heart pounded, but he kept his composure. He reached slowly for his sidearm, not yet drawing it but ready. The figure paused, then stepped forward, revealing a strange device in its hand, an object emitting a faint glow. It pointed it toward the ground, then slowly lowered it. The creature's voice was a rasp, almost mechanical. You've seen the signs. You're not meant to understand yet. Thomas's grip tightened on his weapon. His mind raced for a response, but no words came. Instead, he kept his eyes fixed on the intruder, noting the subtle movements, how the figure's posture betrayed a mixture of curiosity and caution. Without warning, the figure turned and vanished into the trees, leaving behind only the faint hum of the device. Thomas remained frozen, heart pounding. He stared after the disappearing shadow, then looked down at the footprints, which now seemed less random, more like a deliberate message. The realization hit him. This was no ordinary animal or trespasser. Something intelligent had been watching him, guiding his attention. The pattern, the scent, the strange device, all pointed to an unseen hand orchestrating events. He lowered his weapon slowly, a new resolve forming. The tracks, the strange visitor, the cryptic signals, they were all pieces of a puzzle. Tonight, he had uncovered part of the truth, but the full picture was still hidden in the darkness. As dawn threatened to break the night's hold, Thomas prepared to leave his cabin. The footprints had led him to a revelation, one that would change everything he thought he knew about these woods. The forest was awakening, and with it, a force far beyond his understanding was beginning to reveal itself. The first light of dawn seeped through the narrow cracks in the cabin's weathered wooden walls, casting faint, shifting shadows on the frost-hardened ground outside. A thick, swirling fog hovered low over the snow, curling around the sparse trees and muffling the distant sounds of the forest's awakening. The air was biting cold, each exhalation forming a fleeting cloud that quickly dissolved into the icy silence. Inside, the stillness pressed heavily, broken only by the faint groan of the old logs settling under the weight of morning. Thomas sat silently by the window, his gaze fixed on the misty landscape beyond. His hands rested on his knees, fingers rough and trembling, not from age, but from a persistent, prickling sense of unease that refused to fade. Memories of the night's shadows haunted him. The strange noises, the metallic scent lingering in the air, and the unnatural silence that had fallen after the storm of sounds. He had examined the snow around the cabin, noticing faint footprints circling the perimeter, deliberate, watchful, yet no new tracks had appeared. Still, the sensation of being watched prickled his skin, making him tense. Suddenly, a faint movement outside caught his attention. Through the thin glass, he saw a figure standing motionless just beyond the frost-covered pane. His eyes sharpened, narrowing on the silhouette. A young boy, perhaps no older than 12, stood rigid amidst the swirling fog, clutching something tightly in trembling hands. The boy's face was pallid, eyes darting nervously from shadow to shadow, as if expecting them to leap out at any moment. Thomas hesitated, then pushed open the door. The cold air hit him instantly, sharper and more biting than before, forcing him to tighten his coat around his shoulders. The boy did not flinch or step back. He remained silent, eyes fixed on the ground, trembling slightly. "Yuki," Thomas said softly, voice rough but steady. "What are you doing out here so early?" The boy's lips quivered as he managed to speak. "Strange sounds last night. Shadows in the woods." Thomas studied him carefully, noting the trembling hands, the nervous flickering of his eyes. It was unusual for a child to venture so far alone, especially with the fog thickening around them. The boy's words carried a weight of genuine fear, compelling Thomas to consider the possibility that something unseen was truly happening. "Shadows," Thomas repeated, stepping closer. "What kind of shadows?" Yuki hesitated, glancing nervously at the trees, then back down at his trembling hands. "Dark shapes moving fast. No sound. I hear them, but I can't see them clearly. And whispers, not words. I was afraid they might come closer." The air grew heavier with unspoken doubts. Thomas's gaze shifted to the forest, where the trees loomed like silent sentinels. The boy's description defied rational explanation, yet the forest had always been a place of secrets, some ancient, some newly awakened. Still, the idea of unseen figures slipping through the woods at night gnawed at him, stirring old fears. He crouched to Yuki's level, placing a steady hand on the boy's trembling shoulder. "Did they do anything? Come near you." Yuki shook his head quickly, eyes flickering with relief mingled with lingering fear. "No, but I saw the shadows and I heard the sounds. I couldn't sleep. I stayed here, hoping someone would come. Thomas looked past the boy into the swirling fog, his instincts warning him to be cautious. Yet, he couldn't dismiss Yuki's account as mere imagination. The forest was unnaturally quiet now, too still, with an eerie silence pressing against his senses. Did you hear anything else? Anything that might help me understand what's happening? Yuki hesitated again, voice dropping to a whisper. Sometimes I think I see eyes watching. Not like animals, bigger, brighter. They blink, but not like animals. And I hear a faint humming like a song, but I don't know where it's coming from. A cold shiver ran down Thomas's spine. The boy's observations aligned with the strange phenomena that had begun to surface. Unexplainable sounds, shifting shadows, and glowing eyes in the darkness. He realized this wasn't ordinary wildlife or natural occurrences. The forest was changing, revealing layers of mystery that defied logic. Have you told anyone else about this? Thomas asked, voice steady but concerned. Yuki nodded quickly. Just my grandmother. She said it's nothing, just wind and shadows playing tricks. But I know better. I had to tell someone who would believe me. Thomas straightened, weighing the boy's words. The sincerity in Yuki's voice was undeniable. He saw the trembling in the boy's hands, the nervous darting of his eyes toward the woods, as if expecting the shadows to reappear at any moment. The situation was growing more complex. All right, Thomas said after a pause. Stay close to the cabin. Keep your eyes open. If you see or hear anything strange again, come straight to me. Do you understand? Yuki nodded fiercely, eyes wide with a mixture of relief and lingering dread. Yes, sir. The old man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small flashlight. He switched it on, the beam piercing the fog and illuminating the uneven snow beneath their feet. We'll check the perimeter now. I want to see if anything's out there, something that shouldn't be. Yuki hesitated, then followed, tentative but trusting. Together, they moved cautiously toward the edge of the clearing, the flashlight's beam cutting through the morning mist. The oppressive silence pressed down on them, broken only by their cautious footsteps and the faint rustling of the trees. Thomas's eyes flicked across the landscape, alert for any sign of movement. The footprints from the night before still circled the cabin, but nothing new had appeared. Yet, the feeling of being watched persisted, prickling at his consciousness, making every shadow seem alive. He paused, scanning the woods with sharp, searching eyes. The fog had thickened slightly, curling around the trees like ghostly tendrils. Every dark shape seemed to ripple with potential menace, every sound amplified, branches cracking under unseen forces, the faint whisper of wind carrying voices that might be real or just imagined. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught his eye, an indistinct shadow slipping behind a tree, gone before he could focus. His stomach clenched. The woods held secrets, and whatever lurked within was neither simple nor benign. Yuki looked up at him, trembling. Do you think it's dangerous? Thomas hesitated, then nodded slowly. It's hard to say, but whatever it is, it's not normal. We need to stay alert. They continued their cautious patrol, each step more tense than the last. The forest seemed to breathe around them, alive with unseen energy. Thomas's mind raced, trying to piece together what Yuki's stories could mean. Whether these phenomena were spirits, shadow figures, or something entirely different. Whatever the case, the woods had awakened, revealing secrets that refused to stay hidden. As they returned to the cabin, the fog began to lift slightly, exposing more of the silent, watchful forest. Thomas felt a new weight settle on his shoulders, a realization that the night's mysteries had deepened. The strange occurrences weren't random, they were signals. Something was stirring beneath the surface, and it was no longer confined to whispers and shadows. It was watching, waiting, and perhaps even preparing to reveal itself. His eyes lingered on the trees, now clearer in the faint dawn light. He understood that their confrontation was imminent. The forest was no longer just a backdrop for fear. It was an active participant in the unfolding nightmare. And he knew that the next steps would determine whether they could survive the darkness creeping from its depths or be swallowed by it entirely. The flickering flame of the lantern cast uneven shadows across the cramped interior of the cabin, the weak glow barely piercing the oppressive darkness outside. A cold wind seeped through the cracks in the weathered walls, carrying a mournful howl that made the shadows dance erratically. Thomas sat upright, eyes fixed on the faint shimmer of moonlight slipping through the narrow window. His face was grim, etched with lines of worry and exhaustion. Yuki sat close beside him, clutching his coat tightly, eyes darting nervously toward the door as if expecting an attack at any moment. Outside, distant howls echoed again, sharper and more piercing this time, raising the hairs on Thomas's neck. The sound was unnatural, unlike any ordinary predator's call. It carried a strange, almost human resonance, distorted by the night's darkness. Thomas reached for his lantern, flicking the wick to ignite it. The small flame sputtered before catching steady. Its glow revealed the sparse contents of the cabin: a rough-hewn table, a couple of mismatched chairs, and a battered rifle leaning against the wall. He checked the firearms chamber, ensuring it was loaded. Yuki watched him with wide, trembling eyes, silent but visibly frightened. Thomas's gaze drifted back outside, listening intently. The howling persisted, now interwoven with faint rustlings and a barely audible crackling, like dry branches snapping under weight. Yet no other signs of movement, no paw prints, no disturbed snow, betrayed any recent passage. The forest remained eerily still, the silence broken only by the distant, haunting chorus. He moved cautiously to the small window, pressing his eye against the glass. The moonlight painted the snow-covered landscape in a cold, silvery sheen. Shadows stretched long and thin across the clearing, but no movement disturbed the pristine whiteness. Still, a prickling sensation of being watched lingered. His instincts, sharpened by decades in the woods, told him something was wrong. The sounds didn't match any known animal, yet their source remained elusive, lurking just beyond his perception. Yuki leaned closer, voice trembling. "Do you think it's just wolves?" he whispered, eyes flickering nervously around the dark corners of the cabin. Thomas shook his head slowly. "Wolves don't howl like that. Not this late, and not with that tone. Something else is out there." His voice was low but resolute, trying to reassure Yuki while convincing himself. He reached into his coat pocket, feeling the smooth, cold surface of a small talisman, a gift from an elder in his youth, meant to bring luck. Though he rarely relied on superstition, tonight it offered a fragile sense of certainty. He stepped away from the window and approached the door. Outside, the snow was undisturbed, pristine, as if no creature had crossed it recently. Yet, the tension in his chest grew heavier. Carefully, he eased the door open just a crack, listening. The wind whipped around the cabin, tearing at his resolve, but no other sounds emerged. No footsteps, no rustling leaves, only the distant echoes of howling. He cast a quick glance at Yuki. "Stay close," he murmured, voice barely audible. The boy nodded, clutching his knees, eyes fixed on the flickering fire. Thomas stepped outside, the cold biting into his skin immediately. He moved slowly, deliberately, each step measured and cautious. The snow crunched softly beneath his boots, a sound he hoped wouldn't carry too far. He circled the cabin carefully, senses alert for any sign of movement. The darkness pressed in from all sides, the trees leaning closer, their branches creaking like whispers of unseen voices. His eyes swept the tree-line. Silhouettes swayed slightly in the wind, but no footprints or disturbances marred the snow. He paused, listening again, but the only sound was the wind's mournful lament. A sudden gust of wind caused the shadows inside the cabin to flicker violently. Thomas's gaze shifted toward the forest, a prickling sensation crawling up his spine. The strange howling resumed, now closer and more urgent. He tightened his grip on his rifle, stepping back toward the door. Inside, Yuki looked up nervously. "Are they coming?" he asked softly. Thomas hesitated, then shook his head. "Not yet, but we need to stay alert." He moved to the window again, eyes scanning the woods. The moonlight revealed a faint ripple across the snow, an almost imperceptible disturbance. For a moment, he thought he saw a shadow, long, thin, moving just beyond the trees. He pressed his palm against the glass, trying to see better, but the shape vanished as quickly as it appeared. Suddenly, the howling ceased, replaced by an unsettling silence that pressed down on the chest like a weight. The oppressive quiet made his muscles tense. He lowered himself onto the chair, fingers tightening around a rifle stock. His mind raced, trying to understand what could be causing these sounds. Was it merely animals, or something more sinister lurking in the darkness? Yuki reached out and grasped his hand tightly. "What if they come inside?" he whispered. Thomas looked into the boy's eyes, noticing his own fears reflected back. "Then we'll stand our ground. We've faced worse." His voice was steady, but beneath it, doubt lingered. The woods concealed secrets, and tonight, those secrets felt closer than ever. A sudden gust slammed the door shut, making both of them jump. The fire flickered violently, casting wild shadows that seemed to dance with malevolent intent. Thomas hurried to stoke the flames, sparks crackling into the darkness. Sleep was impossible now. Every sound, every shadow felt like a warning. He glanced once more at the snow outside and saw a faint, circular pattern, smooth, deliberate, without footprints. His heart quickened. Was it a sign, an invitation, or a warning? The questions spun in his mind, each more unsettling than the last. He pressed his hand against the cold snow, trying to decipher the meaning. As the night deepened, the distant howls resumed, louder and more insistent. Shadows outside seemed to gather, shifting into shapes that defied explanation. Thomas sat rigid, eyes fixed on the forest, muscles taut. The boundary between the natural and supernatural blurred further, as if unseen eyes watched from beyond the veil of night. Suddenly, a faint glow appeared beyond the tree-line, something moving, faintly illuminating the snow with an eerie shimmer. He squinted, trying to identify it, but it disappeared behind a cluster of trees. His senses screamed that something had changed, that the threat was no longer just distant howls, but a presence closing in. He realized that the strange symbols carved into the snow earlier, the whispering shadows, the unnatural silence, they all pointed to an awakening, a force beyond his understanding. Tonight's events marked a turning point. The boundary between the known and the unknown had begun to dissolve. Yuki squeezed his hand tighter. "Do you think it's over?" he whispered. Thomas looked at him, a flicker of resolve igniting in his eyes. "No, but now we know we're not alone. Whatever is out there, it's aware of us. And tomorrow, we'll have to face it." His grip on the rifle tightened, and he set his jaw, readying himself for what was to come. As dawn approached, the distant howls faded into an uneasy silence. The shadows receded, but the sense of an unseen presence remained, lingering like a shadow cast over the landscape. Thomas knew that the night's revelations had changed everything. His understanding, his fears, and the stakes of their survival. The forest had begun to reveal its secrets, and he was no longer an outsider, but a participant in its unfolding mystery. The first light of dawn barely pierced the dense canopy, casting a muted, cold glow over the snow-covered clearing. Silence stretched thick and heavy, broken only by the faint groan of frozen branches and the distant call of a lone bird echoing through the stillness. Thomas stood motionless, eyes fixed on the fresh footprints marring the pristine white surface, spiraling away from the cabin's doorstep. His breath condensed in the crisp air as he knelt, brushing aside a layer of powdery snow to examine the tracks more carefully. The footprints were larger than wolf tracks, broader at the toes, with a pattern that seemed deliberate. The toes initially pointed inward, then shifted direction, tracing a perfect circle around the cabin. Thomas's fingers traced the impressions, feeling subtle ridges, claw marks, or perhaps something sharper. A faint metallic scent lingered in the air, cold and sharp, tightening his stomach with suspicion. He straightened, scanning the perimeter anew, his mind racing to connect the signs. The footprints suggested a creature or presence with intimate knowledge of this terrain, moving with purpose rather than instinct. They weren't random or fleeing, but encircling the cabin, an intentional pattern. His gaze shifted toward the tree line, where flickering shadows danced at the edge of his vision. Yuki was already there, standing stiffly at the wood's boundary, eyes fixed on the shifting darkness. "Yuki," Thomas whispered softly, cautious not to startle him. The boy looked over, eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and unease. "Did you see them?" Thomas asked, voice low. Yuki nodded, lips pressed into a thin line. Shadows, they moved at the edge of the trees. Not like animals, like someone watching us. Thomas's jaw clenched. The words sent a ripple of tension through him. He took a slow step forward, studying the shadows more intently. They flickered again, darker patches against the snow, then vanished behind a thick trunk. It was impossible to tell if they were illusions caused by the morning haze or signs of something more deliberate. He looked back at the footprints, then at Yuki. Could be animals, but these tracks, they're too precise, too human. Yuki's eyes flicked to the ground, then back to the woods. Maybe someone from the village came here, someone curious about the forest. Thomas shook his head slowly. No one's supposed to be out here. Not with how quiet it's been lately. His tone was cautious, edged with suspicion. The recent strange occurrences, the shadows, the scent, made him wary of outsiders or unseen forces. A sudden gust of wind stirred the branches, causing Yuki to shiver. The boy's grip on his coat tightened. "What do you think it is?" Yuki asked softly. Thomas hesitated, eyes narrowing as he studied the circle of footprints once more. His instincts, sharpened by years of solitude and constant vigilance, told him this was no ordinary animal. An intelligent entity had been here, observing, perhaps even testing. The pattern of the tracks and the shadows hinted at purpose. He looked toward the cabin, then back into the forest, weighing his options. The signs were mounting. Something deliberate was watching. The metallic scent grew stronger, sharper, almost invasive. Whoever or whatever had made those tracks was close, and their intent was unmistakable. He clenched his fists briefly, then spoke in a low, firm voice. "We need to stay alert. This isn't just wildlife. Someone, or something, is here, and it's not accidental." Yuki's face reflected a mixture of fear and curiosity. Could it be someone dangerous? Thomas nodded slowly, his mind racing through possibilities. Could be, or something else entirely. Either way, we can't ignore it anymore. He reached for his rifle, checking the chamber with practiced precision. The morning's discoveries had shifted his understanding. This was no ordinary threat. The signs pointed toward an intelligent observer, possibly testing their defenses or perhaps waiting for the right moment. As he stepped outside again, scanning the perimeter, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A shadow darted between two trees, quick and silent. His heart skipped, but he held his breath, steadying himself. The forest was alive with whispers, unseen eyes watching. The footprints, the shadows, the metallic scent, they wove into a tapestry of uncertainty. The feeling that a conscious, calculating presence was observing him intensified with each passing moment. It was no longer just a suspicion. It was a certainty. He turned to Yuki. "Stay close. Don't stray too far. I'll check the perimeter again. We need to find where they're coming from." The boy nodded, clutching his coat tighter, eyes filled with apprehension. Thomas moved cautiously, every sense heightened. The faint rustle of leaves, the distant snap of a branch, the soft shift of movement in the underbrush, all became signals of an unseen threat. He carefully circled the cabin, scrutinizing every inch of snow-covered ground. When he reached the back, he paused, kneeling once more to examine the footprints that now extended deeper into the woods. They seemed to lead toward an unmarked part of the forest, as if guiding him somewhere specific. A gust of wind carried the metallic scent again, sharper than before, piercing his senses. The tracks were recent, and their purpose was clear. Someone or something was nearby, watching, waiting. The deliberate pattern of the footprints confirmed intent, not chance. He straightened, ears straining for any sound. The woods remained eerily silent, save for the distant cry of a bird and the faint crunch of snow underfoot. Yet beneath that quiet, an almost imperceptible shift hinted at anticipation. His gaze flicked to Yuki, whose eyes reflected a mix of awe and concern. "We need to figure out who's been here," Thomas muttered, voice husky. "And why?" Suddenly, a shadow flickered at the edge of his vision, gone in an instant. The discovery of the footprints had shifted everything. No longer was this just a random animal track or a natural occurrence. It was evidence of an intelligent presence, one aware of their scrutiny, perhaps even testing their defenses. The morning's cold light revealed the start of a new chapter, one filled with uncertainty and danger. Thomas's confidence waned, replaced by a growing realization. The forest's secrets had begun to unravel, and something was watching them with purpose. The game had changed. They were no longer alone. The late afternoon sky was heavy with thick, slate-gray clouds that stretched endlessly, dulling the fading sunlight and casting a pallor over the snow-blanketed forest. A biting wind had swept through earlier, but now it had fallen silent, leaving only the soft, restless rustle of dead leaves and the distant, irregular crack of ice shifting on frozen branches. Thomas stood at the forest's edge, his eyes fixed on the approaching figure, every muscle tensed in anticipation. The man emerged from the shadows, staggering forward, shoulders hunched against the cold. His clothing was torn and streaked with dirt, revealing raw patches of flesh through rents in the fabric. His trembling hands clutched at his side, as if trying to steady himself, while his flushed face and wide, glassy eyes darted nervously from shadow to shadow, as if convinced danger lurked behind every tree. Thomas's grip on his rifle tightened momentarily, but he kept his stance steady, ready to react. The stranger's appearance was unsettling. Disheveled hair, streaks of grime across his cheeks, and a faint smear of blood near his temple. Yet, his posture lacked aggression. He seemed more like a lost soul caught in a nightmare than a threat. "Who are you?" Thomas asked, his voice calm but cautious, voice steadying despite the tension. The man paused, blinking rapidly, breathing raggedly. I followed the sounds," he rasped, voice trembling. "Thought I could find the source. Heard something strange. Something watching." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "What sounds?" The stranger looked around anxiously, clutching his torn sleeve. "Whispers, footsteps. Heavy ones, but no one's there. I got turned around. I didn't mean to stumble onto your place." A tense silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions. Thomas took a cautious step closer, keeping his gaze fixed on the visitor. "You're telling me you followed strange noises into these woods alone?" The man nodded hurriedly, beads of sweat forming despite the cold. "Yes, I thought it was just animals. But then I saw shadows, moving fast, just out of sight. And the sounds, they weren't normal. Like something was watching me back." Thomas studied him carefully, noting the fresh scratches on his forearm and a shallow gouge on his shoulder. The injuries looked recent. Dried blood clung to the wounds, hinting at a struggle. A flicker of suspicion crossed Thomas's mind. What else had the man encountered? Did you see anyone else? Or anything unusual besides the shadows? Thomas asked, voice low. The stranger hesitated, eyes flickering again. "No, but I felt like I was being followed. Then I heard voices, whispering, not human. I ran, but they kept coming closer. That's when I tripped and fell into the bushes. Now I'm here." Thomas's gaze sharpened. The story was consistent with his own suspicions. Something unnatural was in these woods. The whispers, shadows, and the sense of being watched all pointed to an unseen presence. Yet doubt lingered. Could this man be truthful, or was he hiding something darker? A faint snap of a branch echoed from the woods, startling both men. They froze, eyes darting toward the trees. Thomas's instincts flared. Something was nearby, observing. "Stay behind me," he ordered softly, lowering his rifle slightly, but keeping it ready. "Keep your voice low. If you saw anything else, tell me everything." The man hesitated but obeyed, edging closer, clutching his torn sleeve tightly. His trembling hands betrayed his fear, and his eyes flicked nervously from the shadows to Thomas. Suddenly, a gust of wind carried a guttural whisper that seemed to come from all directions at once. The hairs on Thomas's arms bristled. He knew these signs, warnings of something far beyond ordinary wildlife. "Listen," Thomas said, voice tense. "You're lucky I found you, but I don't trust easily. If those noises are real, then whatever is out there isn't just an animal. It's something else, something watching us now." The stranger's eyes widened with a mixture of dread and relief. "What should I do? I don't want to stay here if it's dangerous." Thomas took a deep breath, forcing calm into his voice. "We stay alert. Keep your voice down. If you saw anything strange, tell me everything, no matter how unbelievable it sounds." The man nodded, trembling visibly. "I swear, I saw shadows moving faster than I've ever seen, and I heard whispers, voices calling out in a language I didn't recognize. Not human, like they were summoning or warning." A cold shiver ran down Thomas's spine. The woods had become a place of secrets, no longer just a habitat for animals. Something unseen lurked beneath the surface, something that defied logic and reason. He cast a quick glance toward the distant tree line, then back at the trembling man. The sense of dread deepened, but so did his resolve. This stranger's account confirmed that the forest was no longer a simple wilderness. It had become a realm of lurking, possibly malevolent forces. The wind shifted again, carrying a faint, hollow hum that resonated from the depths of the woods. Thomas's senses sharpened. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes pressing down, urging caution. "Where exactly did you come from?" Thomas asked, voice even but commanding. The man pointed vaguely eastward. "From the ridge. I was hiking, then I heard the noises. I followed them, thinking I might find someone or something. But then everything changed. The woods, they felt alive, almost breathing, moving, watching." Thomas nodded slowly. The description aligned with his own perceptions. An unsettling, almost sentient presence lurking just beyond sight. He felt the oppressive weight of unseen eyes, pressing him to be vigilant. "Did you see any tracks? Anything out of place?" Thomas pressed. The stranger shook his head. "Nothing clear. Just strange footprints, like someone or something had been circling around. But I didn't get a good look. It was too dark, too fast." A faint crack echoed again, this time from deeper within the woods, a branch snapping under unseen weight. Both men froze, eyes fixed on the trees. "Get behind me," Thomas ordered quietly, lowering his rifle further but remaining alert. "Stay close, but don't make a sound." The man obeyed, edging closer. His trembling hands still clutched his torn clothing, and his eyes flicked nervously between the shadows and Thomas. Suddenly, the wind shifted once more, bringing a low, guttural whisper that seemed to echo from every direction. The hairs on Thomas's neck prickled. He understood these signs. They were warnings, not coincidences. "Listen," Thomas said, voice strained. "You're fortunate I found you when I did, but I don't trust easily. If those noises are real, then whatever is out there isn't just an animal. It's something else, something watching us, and it's closer than we think." The stranger looked around desperately, eyes wide with a mixture of terror and hope. "What do I do? I don't want to stay here if it's worse than I thought." Thomas steadied himself, voice firm. "We keep our senses sharp. We don't make noise. And if you see anything strange again, tell me immediately, no matter how unbelievable it sounds." The man nodded, trembling but understanding. "I saw shadows moving faster than anything I've ever seen, and I heard voices, whispers that didn't belong to any human I know. It's like the woods are alive and they're calling out." Thomas's jaw clenched. The forest had become a place where reality blurred, where unseen forces stirred beneath the surface. Whatever was out, there was no longer confined to the realm of animals or natural phenomena. He cast a quick glance toward the darkening trees, then back to the man. The sense of danger was undeniable, but so was the necessity to act. This encounter had shifted the balance. He now knew that the woods held secrets far darker than mere cold and shadows. As the wind picked up again, carrying a faint, haunting hum, Thomas realized that their vigil was only beginning. Whatever lurked in the darkness was no longer content to remain hidden. The game of trust and suspicion had escalated, and he had to be prepared for what was to come next. The first light of dawn had long since faded, replaced by an oppressive darkness that seemed to press against the fragile walls of the cabin. Inside, Elena lay trembling, her breath shallow and ragged. Her eyelids fluttered involuntarily, caught in the grip of fragmented, haunting visions. Visions of endless woods, shadows flickering at the edge of her consciousness, footsteps pounding closer with each heartbeat. The nightmare persisted, refusing to release her, even as her body shivered from cold and exhaustion. A distant, guttural growl echoed through the thin timber walls, low and menacing. It was impossible to identify whether it stemmed from an animal or some unknown creature lurking beyond the darkness. The sound stirred Elena further, her eyelids snapping open. Pupils dilated, she instinctively tried to move, but her limbs felt like lead, weighed down by weakness and dread. Her trembling hands instinctively pressed against her chest, clutching her ribs as if to hold herself together amid the chaos. Shadows danced across the room, the only light filtering in through the frost-covered window, casting a dull gray glow. A sudden draft slipped beneath the door, causing the thin fabric of her blanket to ripple. The cold seeped into her bones, intensifying her need to stay still, to listen. Every creak of the old wood and whisper of wind against the cracks heightened her sense of vulnerability, each sound a threat. Elena inhaled slowly, trying to steady her trembling nerves, but her chest refused to obey. The images of predators, both real and imagined, lingered at the edge of her mind, claws scraping bark, glowing eyes piercing the darkness, relentless pursuit that had battered her spirit. Her thoughts spun in disarray, fragmented memories of the chase, of unseen eyes watching her, of the forest closing in. Suddenly, a faint shuffle outside made her freeze. Her eyes darted toward the door, watching the shadowed gap where the hinges squeaked softly. Her breath caught, and her pulse quickened. Was it someone, something, or merely the house settling? Her jaw clenched, suppressing the instinct to scream or call out. She needed to remain silent, to preserve what little strength she had left. Meanwhile, the others in the cabin had fallen into tense silence. Thomas sat near the stove, his face grim, eyes fixed on the door. His hands rested on his knees, fingertips tapping softly in a rhythmic pattern. His senses, sharpened by decades of experience, were on high alert despite his age. Tonight, Even he was visibly strained, muscles taut with anticipation. Yuki curled into a corner, clutching a small blanket tightly. His wide eyes flicked anxiously between Elena and the door, trembling but trying to mask his fear. The boy's youthful face betrayed his anxiety, yet he refused to cry out. Every so often, his gaze would flick toward Elena, seeking reassurance that she was still with him, that they were safe, though the shadows outside told a different story. Elena's lips parted slightly, desperate to speak, but her throat was parched and her voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. Instead, her trembling fingers reached for a small vial of medicine, her only hope to stabilize her worsening condition. Her hand shook uncontrollably, and she could only manage a weak grip around it, her mind racing with the fear that her strength was fading too quickly. A sudden gust of icy wind swept through the cabin, causing the door to rattle ominously. Elena's eyes widened, instinctively drawing her knees closer and pressing her forehead against them in a protective gesture. The growling outside intensified, now accompanied by faint scratching sounds, like claws testing the limits of their fragile shelter. The noise was chilling, unnatural, and impossible to ignore. Thomas shifted, rising slowly from his seat with deliberate caution. His movements were measured, purposeful. He reached for his rifle, propped against the wall, and checked the chamber silently. The click of the bolt was sharp in the stillness. His face was set in a grim expression, a mixture of resolve and concern. He knew that any rash action could be disastrous, but he also understood that inaction could be even more dangerous. "Stay quiet," he muttered, voice low but commanding. "Whatever's out there, it can't see us if we don't make sound." Yuki nodded hurriedly, clutching his blanket tighter. Elena, despite her weakness, managed a faint nod, her eyes fixed on the door. Every muscle ached, yet her mind sharpened with a new, determined clarity. She understood that any movement could provoke the creature outside, but her instincts urged her to remain alert. The growling outside briefly subsided, replaced by a strange, rhythmic scratching, like claws tracing strange patterns on the wood. The sound was disturbing, almost hypnotic in its unnatural cadence. The silence that followed was deafening, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. Elena's breathing grew ragged again, her body trembling uncontrollably. Her vision blurred at the edges, and she fought to stay conscious. Shadows at the window seemed to elongate and shift, as if something beyond her comprehension watched from the darkness. Her mind raced, desperately trying to decipher what lurked outside: an animal, a mythic beast, or something far more sinister. Thomas moved closer, his eyes scanning the room for movement. His voice was barely above a whisper. "We need to hold steady. Whatever it is, it's testing us. We stay here, silent, and see what unfolds." Yuki looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. "What if it breaks in?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "Then we'll deal with it. But panicking will only make things worse. Keep calm." Elena clenched her fists, feeling the feverish heat of her skin against the cold air. Her thoughts were clouded with fear, yet a strange clarity emerged. The nightmares, the shadows, none of it was random. Whatever was outside was no ordinary predator. Something else was at play, something that defied explanation. A faint metallic scent drifted into the room, subtle but unmistakable. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She recognized it immediately, an unnatural, human-made odor mingling with the primal forest smells. Her eyes widened in alarm, and her lips parted to warn the others, but she hesitated, unsure if they would believe her. Before she could speak, a loud crack shattered the silence outside, the sound of wood splintering. The entire cabin shuddered as if struck by an invisible force. The growling resumed, louder and more aggressive. Shadows at the window rippled and twisted, as if something unseen pressed against the walls, trying to break through. In that tense moment, Thomas lowered his rifle slightly, eyes never leaving the door. His voice was steady but urgent. "We stay put. No matter what happens, don't open that door. We listen and we wait." The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by Elena's shallow, ragged breaths. Outside, the unseen threat lurked, its presence undeniable now. Inside, the group huddled together, tense but resolute, understanding that the danger was no longer distant but imminent. Elena's vision blurred once more, her strength waning. She fought to stay conscious, clutching at the fragile thread of hope. Her mind drifted to her injuries, her fading vitality, and the realization that this night marked a turning point, an encounter with something beyond her understanding. The shadows pressing against the cabin's walls were only the beginning of a darker enigma, one that would change everything she thought she knew. Elena's eyes snapped open, her breath shallow and ragged as the candle's flickering flame cast erratic shadows across the rough wooden walls. The chill of the night seeped into her bones, and a bead of cold sweat traced down her forehead. Her gaze darted toward the window, where faint, shifting figures seemed to hover just beyond the glass. Their silhouettes flickered with unnatural movement, barely distinguishable yet undeniably present. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, each thump echoing her rising dread as she struggled to comprehend what her eyes were witnessing. Yuki sat nearby, tense and silent, his eyes wide and fixed on the darkened woods outside. His trembling hands clutched his knees tightly, betraying his attempt at composure. The boy's gaze flickered between Elena and the shadows beyond, searching for reassurance or explanation. The cabin's silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional gust of wind rattling the window panes or the distant, muffled groan of the timbers settling. Neither of them spoke, their shared fear thickening the cramped space. Elena's voice broke the silence, trembling with urgency. "Did you see them, Yuki? Those figures watching us?" He nodded slowly, swallowing hard, eyes never leaving the window. "Yes, I saw lights flickering through the trees, like sparks dancing in the dark. They appeared suddenly, then vanished just as quickly. I thought I was imagining it, but I saw them moving, flickering like fireflies caught in a storm." Her brow furrowed as her mind raced to interpret the images. Outside, the shadows seemed to shift and pulse, almost alive, waiting. She remembered the strange sounds from earlier, an almost metallic click, whispers carried on the wind. And now, these fleeting glimpses of lurking figures. Every instinct told her they were not alone. The woods concealed secrets darker and closer than she had feared. She reached out, grasping Yuki's trembling hand, feeling the cold seep through her fingertips. "We can't stay here much longer," she whispered. "If they're watching, hiding inside only makes it worse. But where can we go?" Yuki's eyes darted to the door, then back to Elena, anxiety flickering across his face. The terrain's too treacherous. The snow's deep, and the forest is dense. We'd risk getting lost, or worse if we try to move now. Elena clenched her jaw, her mind scrambling for a plan. Fear and fatigue tugged at her, but her resolve hardened. She knew the figures outside wouldn't vanish on their own. The flickering lights and shadows meant something they couldn't ignore. Ignoring them wouldn't make the threat disappear. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window, causing a sharp clang that made both of them jump. Elena's heart hammered in her chest as her eyes fixated on the glass, straining for any movement. The shadows seemed to press closer, flickering more intensely, as if trying to peer inside. Her breath fogged the glass, blurring her view, but the shapes remained, tall, dark forms with indistinct features, flickering lights darting between them like watchful eyes. Yuki broke the silence, voice low and urgent. Maybe we should check outside, see what's really there. If they're watching, perhaps we can find a way to scare them off or understand what they want. Elena hesitated, her body tense at the thought of stepping into the cold night air. But her growing conviction that staying inside was risking their lives outweighed her hesitation. "All right," she whispered, voice barely audible. "But carefully. No loud noises, no sudden moves. We need to stay silent and quick." They moved cautiously, Elena grabbing her coat and Yuki clutching a makeshift torch he had fashioned from scrap wood and a rag soaked in oil. The candle was extinguished, replaced by the faint glow of the torch's flame, casting a flickering orange hue over their faces. As Elena reached for the door handle, she paused, glancing outside again. Her breath fogged the glass, and her eyes widened at the sight. The figures had shifted, now closer, their forms more defined, tall, shadowy shapes with vague features. The flickering lights danced between them, like eyes peering through the darkness, watching. Yuki placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, whispering, "Be careful. I saw movement near the trees. Something's out there, waiting." With a deep breath, Elena pushed the door open. The cold air rushed in, biting through her clothing and making her shiver. The snow beneath their feet was pristine and silent, untouched by footprints. Yet, the feeling of being watched intensified. Shadows moved at the edge of her vision, and her eyes darted from side to side, searching for any sign of activity. Outside, the figures stood motionless, almost statuesque. Elena could feel their presence pressing against her consciousness, an almost tangible weight. Her mind raced, trying to determine whether these shapes were illusions or something far more sinister. Could this be a natural phenomenon, a trick of the mind, or is something else at play? Suddenly, a faint glow flickered from the woods. No more than a handful of tiny lights moving deliberately through the trees, as if guiding themselves toward the cabin. The flickering seemed purposeful, almost sentient. Yuki's grip tightened on the torch. "We can't stay here," he said softly. "If they're coming closer, we need to decide. Stay hidden or follow the lights. Maybe they lead somewhere, perhaps to allies or danger." Elena's gaze lingered inside, on the faint glow of the torch that had become their only source of comfort. Her mind was torn between fear and curiosity, the urge to flee and the instinct to confront. The shadows around her pulsed subtly, alive with unseen energy, and the distant hum of the flickering lights grew louder in her ears. A decision crystallized, She could no longer ignore what was happening. Whatever these figures and lights signified, silence and inaction would only deepen the mystery and the peril. She gripped Yuki's arm firmly. "We follow the lights," she whispered, quietly, slow and cautious. "Stay alert." Yuki nodded, eyes fixed on the faint glow, and together they stepped onto the snow-covered ground. The cold bit into their bodies, but a different chill ran down their spines, one born from the knowledge that the woods were no longer silent, that unseen eyes watched, and that something approaching was beyond their understanding. As they moved forward, the shadows outside remained still, almost statuesque, but the distant lights flickered and danced, beckoning them deeper into the darkness. Elena's mind swirled with questions. What did these watchers want? Were they enemies or allies? And most terrifying, what would they find when they finally caught up with the lights? The forest pressed in around them, dense and unyielding, blurring the boundary between known and unknown into an ominous, uncharted frontier. The night pressed heavily around the cabin, the air thick with an almost tangible tension. Shadows flickered at the edge of the forest, stirred by an unseen force that seemed to pulse with purpose. Thomas stood motionless by the window, his gaze fixed on the dark silhouette of trees that swayed slightly, as if responding to a silent command. His fingers clenched tightly around the rifle, knuckles white with effort, but he knew better than to fire without clear cause. Every nerve in his body was alert, sensing that the forest was alive with something more than mere animals. A sudden gust of icy wind rattled the thin walls of the cabin, causing the branches outside to groan and scrape against the roof. Thomas's senses sharpened, tuning into the faintest sounds, the crunch of snow beneath a shifting weight, the subtle creak of frozen wood, and the distant, irregular crackle of twigs. These noises weren't random. They were deliberate, orchestrated by the unseen presence lurking beyond his view. His mind raced to connect the dots, suspecting that something intelligent was manipulating the environment. He inhaled slowly, trying to steady his pounding heart. The cold seeped through his clothes, but it was the adrenaline that made his hands tremble. He had guarded this wilderness for years, but tonight the forest felt different, more aware, more purposeful. A faint flicker of movement caught his eye, a shadow darting between the trees. His body tensed instinctively, and he pressed his face closer to the glass, trying to decipher what he saw. The silhouette was fleeting, slipping between the trunks with unnatural speed. He squinted, but the darkness swallowed the figure before he could make out any details. Only a vague outline remained, like a ghost moving silently through the night. His grip on the rifle tightened, his mind debating whether to shoot or wait. Every instinct screamed for action, yet hesitation rooted him to the spot. Was this a predator or something else entirely? Something that defied his understanding of the woods? A low, rhythmic hum emerged from the shadows, almost musical but tinged with an eerie quality. It seemed as if the forest itself was humming a tune, one that resonated deep within his bones but carried no meaning he could grasp. Then a sharp crack shattered the quiet, startling him so fiercely that his finger instinctively pressed against the trigger. He swung the rifle toward the noise, scanning the darkness beyond the window. For a moment, all he saw was the shifting silhouette of trees, the oppressive silence pressing down once again. He moved cautiously to the door, every step deliberate, ears straining for any new sound. Outside, The snow crunched softly beneath his boots as he stepped into the night. His flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing patches of icy ground and tangled undergrowth. Shadows recoiled at the edges of the light, then reappeared as the beam shifted. The cold air bit into his skin, sharpening his focus. Near the edge of the clearing, a set of fresh footprints crisscrossed the snow, leading toward the thick woods. They were recent, disturbed only moments before his gaze fell upon them. He crouched, examining the tracks closely. They were larger than human footprints, but smaller than a bear's, with uneven impressions that suggested something heavy had moved hurriedly. The weight pressed into the snow, leaving clear marks of urgency and purpose. His mind spun with possibilities. Was this evidence of a predator hunting or merely an animal passing through? Or was it something more deliberate, an entity deliberately leaving signs? The forest seemed to pulse with life, the shadows flickering and twisting as if responding to an unseen rhythm. The faint hum in the background grew louder, more insistent, as if the woods themselves were whispering secrets beyond his comprehension. Suddenly, the rustling of leaves and branches nearby caught his attention. It was soft but persistent, like a breath or a heavy exhale. His grip on the rifle tightened, but he held his fire. Instead, he focused on the sound, trying to discern its source. The rustling was accompanied by a faint, rhythmic shifting, something heavy, moving with deliberate intent. Every muscle in his body tensed as he stepped closer, wary of revealing his position. A flicker of movement again caught his eye, something darting swiftly between the trees, faster than he could follow. The figure was fleeting, obscured by the darkness and tangled branches, yet it sent a cold shiver down his spine. He narrowed his eyes, trying to track it, but the shape dissolved in his shadows once more. His pulse quickened, and he felt a primal urge to act. Then, a sudden, louder crack echoed through the night, closer and sharper than before. Thomas flinched, instinctively raising his rifle and aiming into the darkness. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the silence thickening with anticipation. His mind raced. What was orchestrating this chaos? Was it an animal, or was something beyond? He lowered the weapon slightly, a cautious decision born from suspicion rather than certainty. The shadows stretched and rippled, as if alive, twisting into forms that defied natural explanation. The forest's whispers grew louder, almost a song, an unearthly chorus that hinted at intelligence behind the phenomena. Thomas realized that whatever was out there was not merely a beast, but a conscious force, observing, waiting for the right moment. He took a slow step back toward the cabin, each movement measured and quiet. His senses remained heightened, every sound and flicker of shadow reinforcing the fragile boundary between reality and something far stranger. Inside, the faint glow of dawn still lingered hours away, but the night had already shifted his understanding. The wilderness was no longer a simple realm of nature. It had become a domain where unseen forces moved with purpose, silently orchestrating events beyond his grasp. Reaching the door, he paused, listening once more. The forest's hum persisted, now almost a warning. He knew he was no longer merely a watcher, but a participant, an element in a larger, unknowable game. The shadows outside seemed to pulse with life, waiting patiently. Whatever lurked in the darkness was no longer a mere threat. It was an intelligence capable of influence and manipulation. As he stepped inside, the cabin's warmth offered little comfort against the cold realization that his understanding of this place was forever altered. The night had revealed a truth. The forest was alive with unseen, deliberate forces, and he was now aware that he was being watched, not just by a creature, but by something far more profound, lurking in the shadows, patiently waiting for its next move. Morning light seeped weakly through the thin clouds, casting a dull, gray pallor over the snow-blanketed clearing around the cabin. The air was sharp and biting, carrying the faint scent of pine, mingled with a metallic tang that prickled at Thomas's senses, hinting at something unnatural. He stood a few steps from the porch, eyes fixed on the fresh, uneven footprints crossing the white expanse, leading away from the cabin's door with a chaotic pattern that suggested recent activity. His breath formed fleeting clouds as he crouched, brushing aside the delicate layer of snow with rough fingers. The tracks were deliberate but erratic, small, yet uneven, implying someone or something had paused here, scrutinizing the ground with purpose. No signs of a struggle or bloodstains marred the scene, but a torn piece of fabric, faded and frayed at the edges, was partially buried among the drifts, caught on a protruding twig. Thomas's gaze sharpened as he tugged the fragment free, noting its faded hue and ragged edges, evidence of a desperate struggle or hurried escape. Beside him, Elena sat hunched, trembling despite her thick coat. Her pallid face was streaked with fatigue, her eyes unfocused, and her hands trembled as she pressed them against her knees. Her injuries, though bandaged, appeared to have worsened overnight. Swelling around her ribs had increased, and her breathing was shallow and labored. A faint flush of fever crept across her cheeks, and her skin felt clammy to the touch. Thomas's jaw clenched tightly. The overcast sky refused to let the sun pierce through, casting a dull, oppressive light over the scene. He studied Elena briefly, noting her deteriorating condition, then turned his attention back to the snow, his mind racing. The torn fabric had been ripped with frantic force, claws or sharp edges evident in its frayed edges. Nearby, faint, strange markings had been scuffed into the snow, deep, irregular lines intersecting and spiraling outward, resembling symbols or warnings carved with intent. He moved closer, kneeling to examine the symbols with cautious curiosity. The snow around them had been disturbed in a pattern that defied normal footprints, almost as if some unseen force had pressed into the ground, carving symbols that felt deliberately placed yet unfamiliar. The metallic scent intensified, sharper now, making his nostrils flare as he inhaled deeply. A flicker of movement at the edge of his vision made him tense. A shadow darted between the trees, quick, almost impossible to pin down. Thomas instinctively reached for his rifle, but hesitated, lowering the weapon. The forest was silent again, save for the faint creak of branches swaying in the breeze. Still, a prickling sensation crawled up his spine. Something unseen was watching. He cast a quick glance at Elena, who was now rubbing her temples, her face a mixture of exhaustion and wariness. "We need to move soon," he said softly, voice steady but urgent. His eyes betrayed his alertness. Every detail was a thread in a tangled web he couldn't yet unravel. She looked up, her eyes glassy but focused. "Did you see the footprints? The markings?" Her voice was hoarse, strained. It's like someone was trying to send a message. Thomas nodded, once again scrutinizing the symbols. Could be anything, natural or something else. We've seen enough strange signs already. He hesitated, then added, but this feels different. Intentional. A gust of wind swept through, scattering loose snow around their boots. The metallic scent grew stronger, sharper, compelling Thomas to sharpen his senses. The footprints led toward a denser part of the forest, where trees pressed close together, casting elongated, twisting shadows. He spotted more tracks, smaller, irregular, crisscrossing the area, suggesting recent activity. Elena reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a battered flashlight. She flicked it on, the beam piercing the gray gloom, illuminating the snow and the strange symbols etched into it. The markings looked freshly carved, no melting or weathering, implying they had been made with a sharp object or claws recently. Suddenly, a faint cracking noise froze them in place. It came from deeper within the woods, a quick, irregular rustling that didn't match the wind. Thomas tightened his grip on the rifle, voice low. "Stay close. Whatever this is, it's not natural." Elena nodded nervously, eyes darting toward the trees. Her breath hitched as she pointed at a set of smaller footprints veering off the main trail, vanishing into a thicket. Someone was here overnight, or something. Thomas studied the scene again, the symbols, the tracks, the metallic scent that lingered ominously. His mind fought to find a logical explanation, but the pieces refused to align. He remembered Yuki's stories about strange shadows and unnatural sounds, the whispers of the woods that seemed to breathe with a life of their own. A faint hum, almost inaudible, drifted through the air. Thomas strained to catch it, but it vanished as suddenly as it appeared. He looked around, narrowing his eyes. The forest remained still, holding its secrets tightly. He turned back to Elena, who was now clutching her side, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and resolve. "We're not alone," he said quietly, "and I don't think this is just some animal or natural phenomenon." Her lips trembled, but she nodded. "What now?" Thomas hesitated, then gestured toward the thicket. "We follow the tracks carefully. We need to find out what's behind these signs. Who or what is leaving them, and why. We can't stay here and wait for it to come to us." As they prepared to move, a distant, guttural growl echoed through the trees, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the ground beneath their feet. Elena's breath hitched, her eyes widening in alarm. Thomas's grip on his rifle tightened, his mind racing with questions and suspicions. They moved cautiously into the shadows, the strange symbols and tracks their only guides. Whatever awaited them deeper in the forest was no ordinary threat. The landscape had shifted into something unfamiliar, something that challenged their understanding of the woods, and perhaps of reality itself. In that moment, both felt the weight of unseen eyes watching, waiting. The forest concealed its secrets tightly, but now they had been partially uncovered. The answers, or the deeper mysteries, lay just beyond the next bend, waiting to be revealed. The pale afternoon light filtered through the frost-covered windows of the ranger station, casting a cold, bluish hue over the cluttered interior. Maps, photographs, and scattered notes lay strewn across the battered wooden table, remnants of a night filled with restless suspicion. Thomas sat hunched over a thick folder, his gaze fixed on a series of images. Fresh paw prints, torn fabric caught on a broken branch, and strange symbols etched into the snow surface. His fingers traced the outline of a large paw print in the photograph, its edges blurred but undeniably recent. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the distant crack of ice shifting outside and the faint hum of the aging heater. Across from him, Ahmed leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his face set in a skeptical scowl. His eyes darted between the evidence and Thomas, then to a detailed map marked with pins and strings connecting various points near the forest edge. His voice broke the quiet, calm but edged with doubt. Thomas, these footprints could belong to a sizable predator, wolf, bear, maybe a cougar. The snow isn't thick enough to conceal their tracks, and the torn fabric nearby suggests something strong, but not necessarily supernatural. Nature has explanations for all this. Thomas rubbed his temples, exhaling slowly, frustration flickering in his eyes. I've seen tracks like these before, Ahmed. They're too precise, too calculated. Not just an animal passing through. Something was here. The torn fabric isn't just claw marks. It's too clean, too controlled. And those symbols? You saw the photos. Ahmed nodded, leaning closer to scrutinize the images. They could be symbols, sure, but they might also be human markings, hunting signs, ritualistic carvings, or even vandalism. People do strange things when they're lost or desperate out here. Thomas's gaze hardened. I've been walking these woods for over 50 years. I know the signs of natural predators. These aren't typical. Something's off. Something that doesn't fit into the natural cycle. I've felt it, smelled it, especially at night. Shadows move faster than any animal should, and I've seen flashes of movement that don't belong. Ahmed sighed, rubbing his jaw. I respect your experience, Thomas, but we need solid proof, not just gut feelings. The environment's unpredictable. Animals behave strangely when food's scarce or weather shifts suddenly. We've had a cold snap lately. Maybe that's forcing predators into unusual patterns. Thomas shook his head slowly, voice low. This isn't about normal predator behavior. Whatever's leaving those marks, tearing the fabric, it's intelligent. It's deliberate. I've seen enough to know that natural creatures don't leave such calculated signs. We're dealing with something else, something that refuses to be explained away by science. A tense silence stretched between them. Ahmed looked back at the photographs, then to the map where a string connected 2 points near the forest's edge. If we're talking about something beyond the usual, then what? You think it's supernatural? Some kind of creature or entity? Thomas hesitated, narrowing his eyes. I don't dismiss anything outright. I've learned to be cautious, but I won't jump to conclusions either. I want to believe there's a logical explanation. Still, the signs are mounting. The other night, I saw movement, dark, quick, almost like a shadow slipping past the moonlight. Not an animal, not a person. Something else entirely. Ahmed leaned back, arms crossed again. And what's your plan? Keep watching, waiting for more signs? That's what we've been doing. Maybe it's time to bring in reinforcements or set up a camera trap to catch whatever's out there. Thomas nodded slowly. That's a start. But I also intend to review old reports from nearby stations. People have been hearing strange noises, missing livestock, odd lights. It's all connected. I just don't want to be caught off guard if whatever's out there decides to make a move. A faint shuffling sound drew their attention. Thomas instinctively straightened, hand reaching toward his coat. Ahmed's eyes flicked toward the door, then back to the evidence spread before them. Did you hear that? Thomas asked quietly. Ahmed nodded. Probably just the building settling, or maybe a bird, despite the cold. But then a muffled thud echoed faintly, sharper this time. Both men exchanged wary glances. Without a word, Thomas rose, moving cautiously toward the door, easing it open. Outside, the corridor was cloaked in darkness, shadows pooling in the corners, the air thick with the scent of snow and something metallic, faint but persistent. He peered out, scanning the empty hallway. Nothing moved, just the hum of the heater and the distant crackle of ice. He stepped into the corridor, voice lowered. "Stay here. I'll check it out." Ahmed hesitated but nodded. As Thomas moved toward the staircase leading to the upper floors, a sudden gust of wind rattled the window panes, causing them to shudder. Outside, the woods stretched into an impenetrable darkness, silent yet tense, as if waiting for something unseen. Thomas reached the top of the stairs, senses heightened. The second-floor hallway was empty, save for the flickering overhead light. He paused, ears straining. The building creaked again, slow and deliberate, like footsteps echoing from an unseen presence. He advanced carefully, heading toward the back window overlooking the forest. His eyes narrowed as he studied the treetops. Shadows flickered just beyond the line of sight, shifting subtly, as if something was watching him from the darkness. A cold shiver ran down his spine, not from the wind, but from the feeling of being observed. Then, a faint glow appeared in the woods, a brief, unnatural shimmer before vanishing. His heartbeat quickened. Whatever lurked outside was still there, concealed just beyond reach. His mind raced, weighing rational explanations against the gnawing suspicion that tonight's mystery was far from over. He turned back, voice steady but edged with urgency. "Ahmed, I saw movement. Not an animal, not human, something else. We need to prepare for what's coming." The biologist's face remained skeptical, yet his eyes betrayed a flicker of concern. "Then we stay alert. Whatever it is, it's not finished with us yet." Outside, darkness thickened, and the woods seemed to pulse with unseen life. The fragile boundary between reason and myth had blurred, and the night promised revelations, whether terrifying or enlightening. The tension in the air grew heavier, the unspoken understanding that the true danger was still lurking just beyond sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The wind tore through the sparse trees surrounding the cabin, its howling echoing with relentless fury. Sharp gusts rattled the loose shutters and bent the skeletal branches, sending icy droplets splattering against the weathered planks. Shadows flickered erratically in the weak glow of a lantern, its flickering flame struggling against the storm's rage. Inside, the small group moved with tense urgency, each person acutely aware that their fragile shelter was only a thin barrier against the chaos lurking just beyond. Thomas stood by the doorway, eyes fixed on the dark silhouettes flickering at the edge of the clearing. The storm's roar masked any distant sounds, yet a prickling sensation crawled up his spine, telling him danger was near. His grip tightened on the makeshift spear, a sharpened branch wrapped in rough cloth, ready to strike at a moment's notice. His gaze darted from shadow to shadow, searching for movement, for any sign that their hideout had been compromised. Yuki and Elena hurried to reinforce the thin barrier of blankets and scrap metal they'd cobbled together. Elena's trembling hands fumbled with broken planks, her face pale and damp with sweat despite the freezing air. She kept glancing outside, as if expecting the darkness to suddenly reveal an attacker. Yuki, younger and impulsive, clutched a small stone, his knuckles white, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and resolve. Their frantic efforts seemed almost futile against the howling wind and shifting shadows. A faint, irregular tapping sound sliced through the wind's shriek. Everyone froze, listening intently. It was distant but deliberate, like a warning or a signal, perhaps an intruder trying to get their attention. Thomas stepped closer to the doorway, peering into the darkness. His breath fogged in the cold air, and the storm's intensity seemed to amplify the feeling that unseen eyes watched them. Suddenly, a violent gust tore through the shelter, ripping a section of the makeshift wall and exposing a narrow gap. Elena gasped, instinctively pulling Yuki back. Thomas lunged forward, pressing his palm against the opening, feeling the icy air seep into the shelter. His mind raced. Was this breach caused by the storm, or was something else at play? Shadows flickered again, closer now, their shapes elongated and shifting as if alive, feeding on the chaos. "Everyone, stay alert," Thomas whispered, voice barely audible over the storm's fury. His eyes flicked toward the flickering shapes outside, trying to decipher whether they were human or something else entirely. The wind's howl drowned out any sounds of footsteps, but the tension thickened, pressing down on them like a weight. A sudden crack of thunder boomed overhead, momentarily drowning the storm's roar. In that silence, a faint rustling emerged from the trees, slow, deliberate, almost methodical. Elena pressed her hand to her mouth, suppressing a gasp. Yuki's grip on the stone tightened, his knuckles blanching. Thomas's senses sharpened. He could feel the presence drawing closer, whether human or supernatural, it no longer mattered. The threat was real and imminent. A shadow darted across the edge of the clearing, quick and fleeting. Instinct took over. Everyone ducked or crouched, trying to hide from what was outside. Thomas raised his spear, ready to confront the unknown. The lantern's flickering light cast uneven patches of illumination on the snow, revealing faint footprints, small, hurried, disturbed, leading toward their shelter. The tracks disappeared just beyond the tree line, swallowed by the darkness. Thomas clenched his jaw, realizing the danger was no longer distant. It had found them. The storm raged around the cabin, as if nature itself was unleashing its fury to conceal the threat. Every gust carried whispers of the unseen, a symphony of chaos that grew louder with each passing second. Yuki broke the tense silence, voice trembling. Should we try to escape or hide deeper? His question betrayed a flicker of youthful bravado, but the fear was unmistakable. Elena looked at Thomas, desperation flickering in her eyes. "We can't stay here forever. We need to do something now." Thomas hesitated, weighing their options. The storm's ferocity made escape perilous, yet staying meant risking an attack. His gaze flicked toward the dark forest, then back inside, where his companions prepared for what might come. The flickering shadows outside seemed to grow bolder, their shapes more defined, as if claiming the night. Suddenly, a violent gust swept through the cabin, causing the lantern to flicker violently before plunging everything into semi-darkness. For a moment, the outside shadows stretched and elongated, reaching toward the shelter like grasping hands. The wind scream almost drowned out the faint sounds of cautious footsteps approaching, small, deliberate, yet unmistakably purposeful. Thomas tightened his grip on the spear, instinctively sensing that the real challenge was only beginning. The line between natural storm and something far more sinister blurred under the storm's relentless assault. Whatever lurked outside, human or supernatural, had already crossed into their world. The night was no longer a mere stormy night. It had become a battleground, and dawn's uncertain light was their only hope of salvation. As the wind reached its peak, the shadows pressed closer, and the first faint streaks of dawn shimmered just beyond reach, promising that change was imminent. The group's situation had shifted, trust was fraying, and the threat had become personal. Their fragile refuge was compromised, and the true confrontation was imminent. The storm had finally spent its fury, retreating with a deep, echoing rumble that gradually dissolved into a distant, muffled drone. The forest, battered and trembling from the violent upheaval, settled into an uneasy silence. Thick, soaked snow clung to the branches, bending them under the weight, some snapping with a sharp crack that echoed through the trees. Fallen limbs and shattered twigs littered the ground, creating a chaotic mosaic of destruction. Overhead, a persistent drizzle seeped through the overcast sky, drenching the landscape in cold mist that blurred the boundaries between earth and sky. Elena lay on the muddy ground, partially cocooned under a tattered blanket she had scavenged from the wreckage. Her shallow breaths now steadied, and her pallid face betrayed a fragile calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos moments before. The fever that had tormented her ebbed away, leaving behind a faint sense of relief. Her eyelids fluttered open, struggling against the diffuse, gray light filtering through the clouds. She blinked, trying to focus on the familiar silhouette of Thomas kneeling nearby, his face tense with concern. He moved cautiously, brushing snow from a fallen branch to clear a small patch of ground. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of recent events. His gaze flicked between Elena and the surrounding woods, alert for any sign of lingering threat. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, broken foliage, and the residual charge of the storm's violence. Every rustle of leaves seemed unnaturally loud in the heavy silence. Thomas straightened, inhaling deeply. The scent of rain and pine filled his lungs, grounding him momentarily. He surveyed the area carefully. No fresh footprints, no torn snow, no signs of recent movement. It was as if the storm had erased all traces of disturbance overnight, leaving behind a deceptively peaceful scene. Yet his brow furrowed, suspicion flickering anew. Could it truly be over? Or was something lurking unseen, waiting in the shadows for a chance to strike again? He reached out, gently pressing 2 fingers against Elena's wrist to check her pulse. It was steady, reassuring. Her eyelids fluttered again, and she looked up at him with a faint, uncertain smile. "You're stable," he murmured softly, voice rough from disuse. "The fever's gone." She nodded weakly, her voice barely audible. "Did the storm pass?" "Yes, it's gone for now." Thomas cast a cautious glance upward, watching the swirling clouds. The sky was clearing just enough to reveal a pale, muted sun trying to pierce through the gray. The fragile light seemed almost mocking, as if nature was hinting at normalcy. Yet beneath that veneer, a gnawing suspicion persisted. He shifted his gaze back to the forest, noting the absence of recent signs of disturbance. No footprints, no torn branches, no movement. The snow was pristine, save for scattered debris and a few flattened patches where trees had fallen. It was as if the chaos had been swept away by the storm itself, leaving behind an illusion of calm. Still, his instincts prickled. Something was off. He moved cautiously, testing the ground with deliberate steps, eyes scanning the treetops and shadows. No movement, no whispers, only the faint drip of melting snow and distant bird calls punctuated the silence. But the unease lingered. He knelt beside Elena again, pulling a small flask from his coat pocket and offering it. She hesitated before taking a sip, her trembling fingers betraying her weakness. The warmth of the liquid seemed to bolster her, giving her enough strength to speak. "Do you think it's safe now?" she asked, voice strained but earnest. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "It's the clearest it's been since all this started. But I can't shake the feeling something's still here. Watching, waiting." Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of fear crossing her face. "You think, after everything, it's still out there?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "I don't know. The signs, no footprints, no torn fabric, no fresh disturbances, should mean it's gone. But experience tells me otherwise. Sometimes the quiet is the most dangerous part." A gust of wind swept through the trees, causing branches to creak and sway. The hollow sound seemed almost mocking, a reminder of how fragile their temporary peace was. Thomas clenched his fists around his coat, instinctively wary. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something unseen. Elena looked around, her gaze settling on the broken branches and scattered leaves. Maybe it was just the storm. Maybe everything was natural. Thomas shook his head. Storms can be fierce, but they don't leave behind symbols carved into bark or torn cloth. They don't make footprints vanish or erase signs of struggle. Something deliberate was here, something that wanted to hide. She hesitated, doubt flickering in her eyes. Then what's next? He exhaled slowly, glancing once more into the woods. "We keep moving, stay alert. The threat might have receded, but I don't believe it's gone for good. Not yet." Suddenly, a faint crack echoed from deeper within the forest. The sound was subtle, like a snapped twig, but sharp and unnatural. Thomas's hand instinctively moved toward his rifle, though he paused, knowing that shooting blindly might escalate the danger. "Did you hear that?" Elena whispered, her voice trembling. He nodded, eyes narrowing. "Yes, it's time to change position. Not far, just enough to get a better view." They rose slowly, limbs stiff from cold and fatigue. Thomas kept his rifle at the ready, scanning the trees for movement. Elena, still weak but resolute, followed closely, her gaze darting from shadow to shadow. As they moved away from the clearing, the forest seemed to close in again, the silence thick and oppressive. The ground beneath their feet was uneven, patches of snow melting into muddy earth, creating a patchwork of white and brown. Branches snapped under their steps, the only sounds other than their breathing. Reaching a slight rise, Thomas signaled for Elena to stay back. He crept forward, inching toward a vantage point overlooking the woods. From this height, he examined the landscape. Nothing appeared out of place, yet a persistent sense of dread clung to him. He lowered himself carefully, then turned back to Elena. Her face was pale but alert, ready for whatever might come next. When he nodded, they resumed their cautious approach. At the edge of the trees, Thomas paused, scrutinizing the clearing below. No footprints, No torn leaves, no disturbed snow. The natural world had seemingly erased all traces, leaving only a tranquil surface. Yet, the feeling of unseen eyes remained. He exhaled, a mixture of relief and suspicion. It's like it was never here, he murmured. Elena looked around, her voice quiet. So maybe it was just a storm after all. He shook his head slowly. Maybe, but I've seen enough to know that some signs don't vanish without reason. Symbols, marks, subtle clues. When they disappear, it's often to hide something more sinister. A sudden gust of wind caused the branches to sway and whisper. The woods responded with a faint shudder, as if alive and aware. Thomas's jaw clenched. Whatever it was, he said with quiet determination, it's not finished with us. Not yet. Elena studied him, a flicker of cautious hope in her eyes. Then what do we do now? He hesitated, then looked toward the horizon, where the first light of dawn was breaking through the clouds. The storm had passed, but the shadows still lingered, silent, waiting. Now we decide carefully, because the silence might be hiding the truth. Morning light seeped softly through the half-open window, casting gentle golden streaks across the worn wooden floorboards. The air inside the cabin was still, carrying a faint scent of pine and damp earth, a reminder of the night's quiet watch. Outside, the forest whispered in a hushed rhythm, leaves trembling slightly in a breeze that carried no immediate threat. The group sat around the small table, their faces marked by exhaustion, but also a cautious flicker of resolve, each lost in thought. Elena shifted her position, her face pale, but her eyes clearer than they had been in days. Her gaze flicked between the window and her companions, searching for reassurance. Yuki's small hands clenched tightly around a mug of steaming tea, her knuckles white from the grip. She studied the forest beyond the glass, then looked back at the others, her mind racing with possibilities. Thomas leaned back against the wall, his weathered hands resting on his knees. His gaze lingered on the sunlight filtering through the branches, but his mind was elsewhere, evaluating their situation, weighing risks against instincts. The memories of past encounters with the wood's unpredictable nature haunted him, reminding him that patience could be more powerful than haste. We should consider staying. Yuki finally broke the silence, her voice tentative but firm. If we leave now, we might miss something crucial. Maybe whatever is out there isn't just a threat, but part of the bigger picture, something we need to understand. Elena nodded slowly, her lips trembling into a faint smile. Maybe we've come this far, and running away doesn't feel right anymore. Not after everything we've endured. Thomas studied them both, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. His experience told him caution was vital. Rushing could lead to disaster. But deep inside, a quiet voice urged patience. Some mysteries required time to unravel, and impulsive action might only deepen their peril. He reached out, fingers tapping softly against the rough surface of the table. Remaining here means accepting that some things in these woods are beyond our grasp, he said softly. But it also means we stay alert, watchful, and trust our senses. We're not helpless. We have to decide what risks are worth taking. The others nodded, yet their eyes betrayed lingering uncertainty. The sunlight grew brighter, casting long shadows that stretched across the cabin walls, as if the forest outside was observing them silently. The distant rustling of leaves, and the occasional crack of a branch were the only sounds, a reminder that nature itself seemed to hold its breath. Yuki looked down at her hands, then met Elena's gaze again. If we stay, we need a plan. We can't just wait and see what happens. We should prepare for anything. More strange noises, fleeting shadows, or even something more unpredictable. Elena's eyes widened slightly. A flicker of hope mingled with trepidation. Like what? Do you think we'll find answers here? Yuki hesitated, then nodded. Maybe not all the answers, but enough clues to guide us. We've seen enough signs to know this isn't ordinary. Something is watching us, perhaps guiding these events. We need to be ready to face whatever comes. Thomas sighed, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Preparation is wise, but overthinking can freeze us in place. We must find a balance. Caution paired with action. Staying here gives us a chance to observe, but it also makes us vulnerable. A gentle breeze slipped inside, stirring the tattered cloth hanging near the window. Outside, the forest remained eerily still, yet every so often, a branch would snap or a leaf would flutter, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. The group's discussion paused as each contemplated their next move, the weight of uncertainty pressing down. Finally, Elena broke the silence again, her voice steadier than before. I think we should stay for now, but we need to set boundaries. Watch points, signals, anything that can alert us if something changes. Yuki nodded eagerly. Yes, and maybe we can try to communicate with whatever is out there. If it's intelligent, perhaps we can find a way to understand it instead of running away. Thomas looked at them, the lines of age and experience etched into his face. He hesitated, then gave a slow nod. Agreed. We stay cautious, observant. We won't forget what we've seen or heard, but we won't let fear drive us either. We must remain vigilant, ready to act when the moment demands it. A calm silence settled over the cabin, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock and the distant rustling of leaves. The sunlight grew brighter, illuminating the dust motes drifting lazily in the air. Outside, the woods seemed to breathe evenly, hiding their secrets beneath a veneer of serenity. As minutes passed, a subtle shift occurred. The sense of menace, of an imminent threat, lingered but softened into a cautious awareness. The group understood that some truths might remain forever beyond reach, that the forest's mysteries were woven into its very fabric, waiting patiently to reveal themselves at their own pace. Thomas cast another glance toward the window, narrowing his eyes. Somewhere deep within the woods, unseen but palpable, something was still watching, perhaps waiting, or maybe it had already begun to stir, moving silently in the shadows, gathering strength. They could not know for certain, but for now, they had chosen to stay, listening, watching, and preparing. The forest outside remained silent, yet its quiet carried 1,000 unspoken questions. In that stillness, they readied themselves for what might come next, knowing that the only certainty was uncertainty itself.